Hey friends, in this video, we're going to dive deep into the world of the tone curve. By the end of this tutorial, the tone curve will have no secrets for you. I decided to give one lesson for free from my timeless editing masterclass, where I teach how to edit portraits to achieve that timeless effect reminiscent of analog photography. I spent time finding the simplest way to explain this because understanding curve is fundamental. I decided to present this segment on the tone curve exactly as my students see it in the class. Nothing has been removed or added. If you enjoyed this video, you can check the entire masterclass by visiting masterclass.kevtex.com. You can also join my Telegram channel, it's free. I share information such as camera use, lens, and my settings for every photo I share on social media. Plus, I even offer free presets to members. Enjoy the video. Before going into the curve module, I'll reset my image. As I mentioned earlier, I underexposed during my shoot, so before getting into the point curve, make sure you have an exposure that suits your preferences. To understand curves, let's take one histogram and analyze it. Right now, this line is straight, which means it reflects no change in the image. You can see that the histogram goes from blacks to white horizontally. These are the inputs, and vertically, these are the outputs. This line tells Lightroom or Photoshop how to interpret the colors. Blacks are on the left, white are on the right. The first box represents blacks. This column represents the shadows. The third column represents the highlights, and the last one represents the whites. If I take the bottom point in the middle, it's in the grays in the inputs, and as I follow it to the outputs, it's also in the grays. If I look at the white points, they're white, connecting to a white point. It's the same if I take this point representing the shadows. And it's also the same for this point representing the highlights. This line just tells us that the inputs and outputs are the same. It's a bit mathematical because these are exposure points. You have 255 possible points for each curve. For the red channel, it can have a value between 0 and 255 for the green channel, and for the blue channel, it's the same. To demonstrate what we just seen, I'll take my gradient that goes from black pixel and gradually goes to white. If I want to make this gradient completely white, what should I do? I'll take the point representing the black pixel and tell them to be interpreted as white. And if I want to make this gradient completely black, I'll take the point representing the white pixel and tell them to be interpreted as black. Now let's look at the usefulness we can have with the curve. As we just saw that we could touch specific area with the tone slider in the previous lesson, I will show you what we can do regarding this adjustment with the point curve. To better understand how to manipulate the tone curve, we will create 3 points like this. Then we will adjust each point and see how it affects our image. If I want to adjust the blacks, I can play around with this first point. To manipulate the shadows, I can work with this point here. This point in the middle will affect the midtones. And this fourth point to tweak the highlights. And finally, I can adjust this point to adjust the whites. In fact, I can touch any type in much more extreme ways than with the sliders. So, why do we have 2 different tools that accomplish the same thing? The point curve is a mirror representation of basic development, but this is shown through a graph. Firstly, it's essential to understand that the curve appears before the sliders. As for their inception, the point curve is a concept that has been around for longer, being a standard element in digital photo retouching for decades. It has its roots in older photo editing software like Adobe Photoshop, which existed long before Lightroom. Tone sliders, on the other hand, can be seen as an evolution to make photo editing more accessible and intuitive. especially in software like Lightroom, designed to be user-friendly and enable a quick and efficient workflow. Tone sliders are more intuitive and easy to use, making them ideal for beginners or for quick global adjustment. The point curve provides more precise and sophisticated control over exposure and contrast in different tonal range of the image. It's an advanced tool that may be preferred by more experienced users because it will allow to create unique and authentic edits. And finally, these two tools are independent. It gives us more flexibility to retouch our image. Now that we have both, the tone slider and the point curve in Lightroom serve to offer different level of control over exposure and contrast adjustment, allowing users to choose the tool that best suits their needs and expertise level. But if you want to play with the big boys, you'll need to learn how to handle curves. So I've switched my image back to RAW, and you can see that my initial exposure isn't right. As we discussed, I have two options to fix it, either adjusting it with the exposure slider in the basic development or doing it with the curve by raising the midtones. Let's go with the second option and see how it turns out. But we're facing a problem here. Since we don't have the right exposure from the start, we need to pull the curve way up. This makes it impossible to use the curve to truly create a unique edit, because the line needs to be straight to be modified with the beautiful curves. I won't be able to use the curve to create a S-curve since it will be too stretched upwards. So remember, the first thing you should do is adjust your exposure to have a good base before going directly into curve. Otherwise, I couldn't create a beautiful S-curve if I wanted to. So it's important to choose the right exposure from the beginning using the exposure slider. Now, if I go back to my curve and place a point in the middle, you can see that I have more room to maneuver. To demonstrate that the curve and basic development are mirror, let's duplicate the image twice. Apply a very easy and simple S-curve. And then, let's touch the contrast slider in the basic development. I will increase the contrast in the basic development of this portrait. We did exactly the same thing on the image. You got it? Now you understand why I always begin by editing my photo with the curve rather than the basic development, since the curve will create contrast in a much more detailed manner. This is where we will establish our unique style. We can later make smaller adjustments with the basic development. The lesson to take from this is always to start your editing not with basic development, but with curve. The only exception to using one of the basic development sliders is when the exposure isn't correct from the start. Let's revert back to my initial edit and analyze the curve. If we take the first point, which is about the blackest blacks as input, they have been turned into dark gray in the outputs. The mid-dark gray is almost the same. The mid-light gray is almost the same. And the whites are represented by the light gray. So the dark tones here, this big area, are represented by smaller range and lighter tonalities now. So we contracted. These mid-gray are represented by a bigger tonal range, so we've expanded or added more contrast. And this range from mid-light gray to white, which is the highlight, are represented by a smaller tonal range. This curve allows you to distribute the tonal range differently and view it in a new way. And by doing this, we also change the contrast of our image. As soon as you understand that a steeper line adds more contrast and a shallower line reduces contrast, you can do very smart things with your image. Care must be taken when handling curves, as it's easy to ruin a photo. You see, if I take this point here and drag it a bit on the right, we lost information in the white. It is confirmed if I press J on the keyboard. Everything that's white is overexposed and lost. Now, if I do another point here and drag it down, we ruin this gradient that comes from the gray, blacks, and whites. If I press GK on our keyboard, it shows what is too white or too black. We can see that red is represented by what's overexposed, and there is very little blue that is underexposed. This is important because when it's too black or too white, it means we lost information. With tone slider, achieving this result would be impossible. That's why Lightroom has created a much simple to use curve. It's called the parametric curve. You see, I can only move upwards or downwards on the curve. Adjustments are made based on regions and choose how I want it to be affected. The particularity of the parametric curve is that it always produces smooth curve, making it difficult to ruin a photo. I can also play with the sliders. I'm more limited. Let's reset the parametric curve sliders. Whereas with the point curve, you can go anywhere. But let me show you a little trick with the point curve. If I hold down Shift while moving the point, it will only go up and down, which is helpful because to have a beautiful edit, we need a nice curve. Another way to ensure the most beautiful curve possible is to click on a point. Then adjust using the mouse from left to right on inputs and outputs. This way, you can immediately see what type of curves you will have and ensure they are beautiful. It's important to have beautiful lines with nice curves. So in the end, we can have the same ease at the parametric curve. What's great is that they are independent of each other. I can create a curve with the point curve and then fine-tune it with the parametric curve. This is the beauty of having these independent layers. If I go to the parametric curve, I can change how this point moves by adjusting this blending point. Moreover, I can adjust each of these regions. With the highlights, I can say, it's a bit too much, I need something more subtle. Then I can use the slider to go from one side to the other to manipulate and define and get a beautiful curve. So, do you understand? You have two options for using the curve, the point curve and the parametric curve, giving you three choices for your retouching. You can either, option 1, use the parametric curve only. Option 2, use the point curve only. Option 3, use the point curve to create a specific effect and then refine certain area of your photo with the parametric curve. What is known in photography is matte look. When making adjustment to your curve, aim to keep the movement subtle. Think of graceful curve movement for this curve, no abrupt shift. If I really take this point and pull it upwards, you'll start to achieve a matte look. Don't forget to hold on Shift. Let's bring the shadows down, just gentle floating tones curves. Looking before and after by clicking on the eye, you can see that I haven't touched anything yet. And already we have something authentic. You can see how this has truly transformed our photo. Next, use the parametric curve to refine the shape of overall tone. Doesn't mean you absolutely have to do it, but if you do, you'll have something very authentic. For the purpose of this course, let's do something unexpected. Let's do an inverted S-curve. Let's put down the exposure a bit. What have we done to our image with this inverted curve? Yes, we have reduced the contrast, and it's visible on our image. Now let's talk about another fundamental element of editing, which is red, green, and blue channel. But first, you might wonder why it's red, green, and blue. Let's step back a bit and talk about the color model issue. In painting, we have the RYB model, which stands for red, yellow, and blue. This model has been used by artists for centuries and served as a basis for mixing paints, inks, and dyes. In this model, red and yellow make orange, yellow and blue make green, and blue and red make purple. In the digital realm, it's a different model. We have the RGB model, which stands for red, green, and blue in English. This model is based on the human perception of light. Our eyes perceive color through 3 types of light-sensitive cells called cones, which are sensitive to wavelengths corresponding to red, green, and blue. The RGB model is used for electronic display devices like computer monitors, television, digital cameras, and smartphones. When RGB colors are combined at their maximum intensity, they produce white. That's why you have 100% red, green, and blue in white. When all are turned off, they produce black. And here's why you have 0% red, green, and blue in black. By mixing red and green, I get yellow, which is also the opposite of blue. Red and blue together produce magenta, which is also the opposite of green. And green and blue together produce cyan, which is the opposite of red. We have primary colors, red, green, and blue, and secondary colors, cyan, magenta, and yellow. This is how we add or subtract color using the point curve. Looking at the color histogram, we have red at the top and cyan at the bottom. So if I place a point in the middle to adjust mean tones and lower the red curve, I will see cyan appear. If I raise the red curve, I will bring out more red. Lowering the red curve means leaving more space for blue and green together, which create cyan. Green at the top and magenta at the bottom. Blue at the top and yellow at the bottom. We've learned how to get primary and secondary color, but we haven't touched on how to achieve tertiary color like orange. To get orange, for instance, we'll need to increase the red, decrease the blue, and leave the green in the middle. You understand that applying a specific color with the curve is not easy, since you must know the addition and subtraction of the RGB model. But there's something else you need to know about the RGB curve. To show you, I'll make an S-curve with the point curve. We'll use the before and after tool and put our gradient with the S-curve on the left. On this gradient, we'll create an S-curve on our red curve. Then we'll do exactly the same on the green and then on the blue. So we just seen that by adjusting each RGB curve, we'll also touch the contrast. So remember that when you also adjust the color curve, you will influence the contrast as well. Let's return to our photo and apply what we just learned. I'll make 3 points and go with the flow with what I see on my photo. By adjusting the red curve, I can add cyan in the shadows and then adding a touch of red to the highlights. I'm going to lower this point here and raise this point here to tell it to interpret the black as red. If I go up, I add green. If I lower the green, I will make room for more red and blue, which creates magenta. I'm going to make a point here and move it slightly. I'm going to make a point in the shadow to add a bit of magenta by lowering it, adding a third point in the highlight to also add some magenta in the highlights. Increasing the point for the blacks so that they are interpreted as greens. Lowering the last point for the white so they are interpreted as magenta. Here it's the same. We can add either blue or yellow. I'll make a point in the midtones. Then subtly adjust to see what works. I'll leave it as it was. It's about experimenting. I'm going to add some blue to the shadows by slightly increasing it. I'll make a point in the highlights to decrease the blue and add a bit of yellow. I'll leave the black and lower the whites. And now look at the before and after. I've just created a new edit in front of your eyes using only curve, nothing else. This is why I always begin to edit my picture with the curves. That's truly where we're going to create our timeless edit. And there you have understood one of the fundamentals of custom retouching in Lightroom and precise shape. This is the foundation of the timeless retouching. We add specific colors to the shadow, highlights, and midtones. Alright, that was the segment on the tone curve from my editing masterclass. If you enjoyed that and you want more on how to create authentic edits that look like film, I go in depth into other Lightroom modules and edit 20 portrait photos live, including some that have become viral and iconic. You can check it here and I'll put a link in the description. In the meantime, take as many portraits as you can.